I want to say good morning to you all, and I'd like to first express my gratitude for inviting me to speak here today about forest bathing. I was here a few weeks ago to hear Linda Shanahan talk about medicinal herbs, and I've, because that goes along with the whole idea of forest bathing. And well, I felt very welcome, and Michael invited me to speak, so I thought I'd share a little bit about my journey. So my name is Judy Rossman, and as Suzanne said, I'm a certified forest therapy guide, and I was trained through the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy, and that was founded in 2012 by a man named Amos Clifford. And it was a 6-month program that I embarked on last spring this time, and it was truly transformational. So I had written a few things down here because yesterday I was trying to figure out how I could, put the content in just 20 minutes. So I might have to read a little bit before I kind of get into the flow here. So, all right. Well, the first thing that I was thinking about is I looked at your mission statement of Circle of Miracles on the website, and it really resonates with the practice of forest therapy. And this is my first time speaking about it in public. And so it really resonates with me. And on your website, you say that Circle of Miracles is an inclusive, spirited community grounded in love, peace, and harmony. So one of the core values of forest therapy is that human communities, like forests, thrive on diversity. And when doing the practice, we often say, all is welcome here. Okay, so when you're out on a forest walk, everybody's journey is different and everything is welcome. And I noticed that was on your website. So one of the problems of our time, is this idea of abstraction and hyper intellectualization, and kind of like, so today I want to talk a little bit about why forest bathing is so relevant, because this whole idea that, when people go out, they say, oh, I saw a lot of trees. They don't realize that every tree, just like every person, is individual, and it's had its own struggle and journey towards the light. And just like we all have in our lives. And so that, so that idea that people are seeing, things as too much like ideas instead of really seeing them as individuals is one of the things about forest bathing. And that's where I wasn't sure if I was going to do this, but I could do this for a second right now. And it was sort of like a meditation, just for you to think about this for a second, if I can find it here. So I thought about, because they asked if I do a meditation, but just the idea of thinking about a tree as that there's individual trees in the forest, and we all have the forest within us also, and we are nature. And so, that's another reason why forest bathing is so relevant today, is this idea that it's called anthropocentrism, the idea that human beings are special and above nature and outside of nature, and somehow nature is just a resource for us to extract things from, instead of, forest bathing is really about having a reciprocal relational friendship with the forest. So I thought about doing this, and so I'll do this with you for a second. So as partners, and this is sort of like just a little meditation we'll do for a couple minutes, and I call it a tree memory. And a lot of times on a forest bathing walk, if we're in like, we start in a parking lot and have to walk to the site where the forest walk begins, we'll do something like this. So as your partners in this practice, the trees and forests welcome you. They recognize and call to your inner forest. And so if you could just take a moment right now to remember a tree that was in some way important to you in early life. Maybe there was a huge ginkgo tree that had golden fan-shaped leaves as you walked to school, or a large maple tree with leaves shaped like hands that would make piles in the fall. Or maybe there was a tree outside your bedroom window that had a nest in it. And even maybe there was a tree you could go to when you wanted to be alone. It doesn't matter if you cannot recall or even knew the name of the species. What matters is the connection you had with that particular tree. The felt sense that is part of being in relationship. And what was your relationship with that tree? So just take a moment and think about a memory of a tree. And I hope all of you do have one. I imagine that you do. Like, how old were you at the time? And when did you first see it? And how did you and the tree interact? Did you climb it? Did you shelter under its limbs or build a fort in it? Eat its fruit? Like, how did you kind of interact with the tree? So a lot of times, if you, hopefully you all have a tree a particular tree. And actually, this was one of the essays we had to write when we were applying to the program that I was involved in. So maybe at another point later, we could share a little bit about that, but I think you get the idea about looking at trees as individuals instead of as something abstract. Okay. Well, another core value of forest therapy is that the health of all beings is interconnected. So forest bathing is principally a practice of cultivating relationship and reciprocity. So, when people say forest bathing, everybody thinks, oh, you go out into the woods and you're sitting by a lake or pond surrounded, or you're bathing in the lake or pond surrounded by woods. Or a lot of times if I talk about forest, people are like, oh yeah, we can get naked in the woods. And, so that's why sometimes forest therapy is sort of like an interchangeable kind of thing. It seems to people sort of accept the idea more. So, so basically, I know when I spoke with Ken, he talked about we'll talk a little bit about the health benefits, but it's the practice is about remembering our relationships with the world. So cultivating a healthy relationship with yourself, with other humans, and with the more than human world, and with this moment in time. So it's not just about health outcomes, although they exist and are important, because that would just make it an extractive process. Like, how can we take from the forest without giving something back? So the other thing about your mission statement that I read on your website was that you said you recognize that there are many paths to all that is. And you practice acceptance and generosity as we share and learn from each other's journey. So one thing about forest bathing and going into the forest, I mean, it's not like rocket science. I mean, we all know that we feel better if we go out into the woods in the sunlight. And as Annette said, just the spring air and watching things emerge and, like the new beginnings. So basically, forest bathing invites us to receive. We use our senses to welcome the gifts the forest has to offer, the sights, sounds, and unique energies we feel from place to place along the trail. So nature is really grand in its generosity, and being open to receiving is part of the communication from the more than human world. So I guess I could tell you a little bit about my journey. So I was born and raised in Bucks County. I grew up in a town called Andalusia, and actually that's part of Bensalem now, and I grew up along the Delaware River. And I feel really lucky that I grew up in a time before computers, cell phones, cable TV, and my identity wasn't shaped by algorithms. So, children of my time period had a lot more freedom, and I got to enjoy many hours of unsupervised play. I mean, TV was boring. There were only 3 channels, 3, 6, 10, like nobody stayed inside. Basically, we went outside and played all day. And so even the boundary between inside and outside was more permeable. Like, we're inside our house, but we didn't have air conditioning. So if it was too hot, we just went and slept in the yard. It was very, my family went camping a lot. So nature was always part of my life. And I felt very embodied in a sensory rich environment and very connected to nature. So like I could tell you facts about the Delaware River. I could tell you, it's 330 miles long, and, it's the largest undammed river. However, like facts, and that's another problem of today's world, we're so data driven. And so I could give you the facts about the Delaware River, but that will never communicate to you the quality of experiences I've had in my relationship to it. And, that is, one of the problems of today too, is just that, the whole people are disconnected from that kind of relationship with nature and being in their bodies. I mean, and that's one of the reasons also, or some of the reasons why forest bathing is so relevant today, because we live in an industrialized and digitized technological world, and people are isolated and sitting in front of screens, and it's really causing a lot of mental health problems and anxiety. So I mentioned in here that, Jacques Cousteau, if any of you remember who he was, Jacques Cousteau once said that we protect what we love. And love comes from a sensory bodily engagement. I mean, when you think about someone or a pet that you love, like it's hard to love someone if you don't really have any sensory bodily contact. When you pet your cat, it's petting you back. When I touch the tree, it's touching me back. When it's a sensory embodied experience. And that's what forest bathing is a lot about. And getting people to, again, love nature with the hope that it will make them want to protect it. Okay. So I feel intimately connected to the landscape of Bucks County. I mean, it's part of me. And again, the idea, and this was from a landscape artist who said, facts become art through love. And it's the whole idea of learning to love. So I was an English teacher for 30 years, grades 7 through 12. And so you know, my virtual reality growing up was literature and books, and other than nature. So I do remember, and combining those two things was a wonderful thing. So when I went camping a lot with my family, I remember reading the poetry of like Walt Whitman for the first time, sitting in the middle of the field. And it was just so awesome, reading the words, I sing the body electric, and feeling just like part of that whole flow. So I retired in 2017, and I live in a very rural part of Bucks County. I live in Tinicum. And, I suddenly found myself alone, no longer in connection with my colleagues and the 120 teenagers I was interacting with every day. So, in my life, it was no longer, I had lived a very regimented, bell schedule, frenetic pace for a lot of my life. And so I found myself, I went outside in the morning and was sitting in the field, and I did nothing but watch bluebirds building their nests for hours. And hours would go by, and I was sitting in a lot of stillness and silence. And then I realized, so we have tame world stories, and our culture tells us, has a productivity bias. So it's sort of like, what am I doing? I'm not doing anything. Like, I'm not being productive. I'm just sitting here. And then you start feeling bad about yourself. And but then I realized that what I was doing was what I was supposed to be doing at that particular time. And then the answer came to me in a kind of an odd way. I saw this book called In the Company of Trees advertised somewhere, and the writer was going to be speaking at a nature center in Princeton. And I did something I normally would never do, which is I went to hear her speak by myself. I just okay, something just led me to go hear the speaker. And that's where I heard for the first time about forest bathing and about the association of nature and forest therapy. But then I thought, why would I have to get credentials? This is something I've been doing my whole life. And, why would I need to get certified to do this after I looked into it a little bit? And then I realized, we live in a credentialed world, and if anybody's going to take you seriously, you need to get the credentials. So I talked about it a lot. Finally, my friends kept nudging me, and so I said I made the time commitment, and it was a 6-month program. It was on Zoom at least once or twice a week for a couple hours, and then every day there were assignments. But it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. So, okay, when I found myself on Zoom, I found myself with people suddenly they were from all over the world. So the people in my cohort were from like Portugal, Spain, England, Finland, Morocco. And so this whole idea of going into nature to heal ourselves, it's kind of, as you talk about your seeds, it's sort of popping up all over the world. And it's sort of what they call like the earth is dreaming. It's sort of like the earth is saying, okay, here's a way that people can heal themselves and the biosphere. Like, we need to correct our relationship with nature. And I mean, it's so accessible. That's what's so wonderful. It's so accessible for everyone. It's free. It's like, it's like it's waiting there to have us empty our minds and open our hearts to receive its gifts. And so that was sort of the practice. So the practice of forest bathing is very simple, but also very profound. I found that there's many layers and lineages that go into it. There's the way of the guide from indigenous cultures. There's archetypes of the psychologist Carl Jung. There's the hero's journey of Joseph Campbell. There's nature medicine from all the cultures around the world. That's just to name a few. And the one interesting thing that Joseph Campbell said, he's the guy that did a lot about myths, if you know anything about him. And he said that, most people aren't looking necessarily for meaning in their lives. They're looking for what makes them feel alive. Because in, our current world, the way things are, it's people have become anesthetized and not in touch with their own, their life force is being diminished. So it's keeping that balance and that harmony. I mean, I'm not saying, hey, there's nothing wrong with technology. I mean, it's great. I mean, we all use it and like it, but it's about keeping a balance. And okay, so I guess I could tell you just a little bit, since, forest bathing is relevant to our time, and as I said, because of all of these problems that we're currently having. So just briefly, I can tell you just a little bit about the history of it. So this is what happened in Japan in the 1980s, okay? So in Japan, they have the practice of, it's called Shinrin Yoku, which literally means bathing in the forest atmosphere. And so in the 1980s, in Japan, they were going through a shift in their economy. They went from an outdoor economy to an indoor economy. So people left the rural areas and went to the cities where the jobs were. Well, the Japanese government noticed this huge spike in cancers and autoimmune diseases, and they're like, what's going on here? So they decided to put a lot of money into research, and they asked the question, what is the health impact of exposing humans to forest environments? Now, this is, I'm not going to go into so many of the health benefits to forest bathing, but I'll go tell you about a couple one. And this is the one that's really important that the Japanese found. So trees keep themselves healthy they emit these organic chemicals into the air called phytoncides. So they're kind of antifungal, antimicrobial, antibacterial, and they use it to protect themselves. Well, the fact is that because we've evolved with the forest, we are nature. And for 99% of our evolution, like, we have been in nature. And so they found that when humans are exposed to these phytoncides, these chemicals, that when we inhale them, it really impacts our immune system. So in our bodies, we have white blood cells, but one of them is called they're called natural killer cells. And it's almost like the body's, first responders, that these white blood cells will go out and do like a scan, and if there's any aberrant cells in your body, they destroy them before the other white blood cells come out and do the job. So the Japanese government actually has made forest bathing part of their health plan, So people go, they have roads that take people to different retreats. They go away for the weekends and do forest bathing. So Shinrin Yoku influenced this practice in North America, but the Japanese have always been, the Eastern cultures have always been more in tune with nature. They see that the more than human world has its sentience. Trees have spirits. It's like the whole world is sort of animated with spirit and life force. Whereas that's why in the Western culture, we got really disconnected from nature in a more toxic kind of way. So that's why the practice here, really acknowledges the science and the health benefits, but here it's more about relationship and reciprocity and healing those relationships with yourself and with other people. And, so the health benefits, a lot of people are drawn to forest bathing for different reasons. And so a lot of people want to know about, the health benefits. But again, it's about giving back and getting in relationship. So that was one of the health benefits. So what is forest bathing? I don't know. I don't know how much time I have. 5 minutes? Okay. So if we were to go forest bathing, let me just tell you what it is as opposed to what it isn't. So forest bathing is not a hike for exercise. You know, a lot of people, when I go out for a walk with some of my friends, they're checking their steps, how far have we gone, how fast have we gone. So forest bathing is not about getting there, it's about being here. So it's not hiking. It's also not a naturalist walk. And I love naturalist walks. With my friends and family, they love taking walks with me because I'll point out the trees and what their names are and plants, but it's not about that either. It's not a nature walk. Actually, it's a really slow paced walk. So that's the one part about it. It's walking, it's a slow walk. And believe it or not, because that helps people relax. The other main health benefit is, as you probably all know, our nervous system has a lot to do with our overall health. The sympathetic nervous system, parasympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic, fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Because of the way we have stress machines in our pocket. We hear about every kind of trauma and killings and war, and one of the problems is that we're constantly in a state of excitability. And so it causes these adrenaline and cortisol, these stressful hormones kind of cascade through our body and have all these really toxic effects on our mental and physical health. So the one main really great benefit for forest bathing and the practice, as I've been taught, is to slow people down, and it turns off the fight or flight one and engages the parasympathetic, which is rest, digest, relax. And that's the one you kind of want to be in most of the time. So going out in the forest, it's very slow, it's very relaxed, and there's a sequence of things that we do, which is why, it's like having a guide is a good thing. So being a guide I had to unlearn a lot of things from being a teacher to be a guide. Mm-hmm. Being a teacher, a lot like you're the sage on the stage instead of a guide by your side. And I found what's wonderful about it is, there's no expectations on a forest bathing walk. There's no outcomes. It's everything is welcome here. There's no judgments. And it's sort of creating this container and holding a space for people to explore and slow down. And paradoxically, the slowing down parts is often the most stressful thing for people because people have a hard time slowing down. And then, for the first part of the walk, it's called embodied awareness, and it's sort of the threshold of connection of getting people into their bodies, into their senses, being aware of the place. That's called the threshold of connection. And then the second part of the walk is it's sort of getting into, it's called, like a liminal state. It's and the guide offers invitations. And what's so wonderful about it is that invitations are exactly what they are. You don't have to do anything if you don't want to. They're invitations. Like one invitation could be, all right, on our walk, let's go out and look at all the things that are emerging for spring. And then people come back after about 15 minutes and we sit in a circle and everybody shares. You don't comment on what people have said. Everybody takes a talking piece, takes a turn. And the only question we ask is, what are you noticing? And the truth kind of sits in the center of the circle. So there's all these, there's the walk usually takes 2 or 3 hours, and it's quite a few invitations. And they also found one part of the walk is you just notice what's in motion. You walk and that helps. One of the problems of mental problems people have is rumination, where you kind of you have the thoughts just keep on the hamster wheel. Well, if you just keep your eyes on what's in motion, it turns that off, that part of your brain. So that's another good thing. And then the end of the walk is usually a tea ceremony, where you literally incorporate the forest into your body with wild crafted teas and things. Well, I know. So now, I haven't done it a lot yet. I had one person, I had to do a number of walks to get certified. I did it with one young woman who had cancer, like she's only like 40. And the other thing is, what's really strange is by being silent and still in the forest, like kind of, it's how nature reveals itself. And, I don't want to sound too like woo-woo about it, but like really kind of magic. It's okay to be woo-woo here. So, yeah, so a lot of really strange, kind of some magical things happen. And even I did a number of walks with her, but now I'm looking to practice because, it's like a seed. I'm not sure where it's going to go, but I feel like I've taken a first step by speaking here today. This is the first time I've talked about this anyway. So the whole idea is focusing on the senses.